Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So this video is about the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. There's usually sporadic firing across the ceasefire line, but in recent days it went from staccato to quite intense. These two Caucasian countries, they're often scrapping over a region called Nagorno-Karabakh. This region is almost exclusively ethnically Armenian, but it belongs legally to Azerbaijan. So the present exchange of fire is actually not in Nagorno-Karabakh, but near this village called Tavush, a bit further north. So at least 18 people have been killed in the past few days. Now, I arrive at that total of 18 by adding the total fatalities together, fatalities acknowledged by each country. Now, both country claims to have inflicted more deaths than on the other. So going by what's been acknowledged, not what's been claimed by the antagonist. This is most intense fighting for 4 years. Even a major general's been killed, and this is a country where senior officers seldom jeopardize themselves. So hats off to him for putting himself in harm's way, that Azerbaijani. So Nagorno-Karabakh's name indicates its unusual history. The name is a mélange of Russian, Turkish, and Persian. Nagorno in Russian meaning mountainous, Kara in Turkish meaning black, and Bakh meaning garden in Persian. Now, the Azerbaijani language is largely Turkish with a bit of Persian. So the 1930s, Stalin reorganized the borders of the Transcaucasian Soviet Socialist Republic, that's to say, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. The only reason these countries were in the Soviet Union is they'd been conquered first of all by the Russian Empire and then by the Soviet Union. In 1917, the October Revolution, Lenin said they could go independent. They all declared independence. Shortly afterwards, the Soviet government reneged on its promise and invaded these unoffending countries. So there was a brief period when the Azerbaijani Democratic Republic existed, 1918 to 1920. And then even during that time, the Bolsheviks didn't stop occupying Baku, Azerbaijan's capital, because its oil was just too precious to let go. So don't let anyone tell you that communists are not imperialist. So Josif Vissarionovich Stalin was, of course, a Georgian, and he wanted to make the breakup of the USSR impossible. So he well understood the complexities and the inter-ethnic asperities of the region. So he endeavored to enmesh the peoples together, and he therefore severed Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenia and allotted it to Azerbaijan, and then moved in more Armenians. It was already an Armenian majority area, but he made it up to a very high Armenian majority in the 1930s. Stalin took an Azerbaijani region and then he awarded it to Georgia. As well as doing that, he moved a lot of Russians and Ukrainians into the Caucasian republics, so that they would have a large minority who were not of that ethnicity. Right? So let's say Armenia would be about 95% ethnic Armenian over a century ago. By 1991, be down to something like 80% Armenian. And likewise in Azerbaijan. And in Baku, only about 50% of people were ethnically Azerbaijani in the 1980s. So, the dissolution of the USSR was possible, as we know, but it was enormously messier and bloodier than it need to have been. And that was due to problems purposefully created by Moscow. So in the late 1980s, Mikhail Gorbachev ended oppression in the Soviet Union. People were no longer sent to prison for setting up an organization other than the Communist Party. And so the National Front was founded in Azerbaijan to campaign for independence. And the Armenians, they founded their own independence party. So Armenians then agitated for Nagorno-Karabakh to return to Armenia. And Azerbaijanis mostly vehemently opposed this, saying legally it pertains to them, which is true, it did. So I won't give you a blow-by-blow account of the fighting, but there's a brief war, 1991 to 1994, and the Armenians got the better of it. So Armenia is one of the most ancient nations in the world. It's got a written history dating back millennia. It's got a unique system of writing. And curiously, the Soviets did not force them to adopt the Cyrillic alphabet for it. I'm not quite sure why they did that. Only they and the Georgians were allowed to keep their own system of writing. So Armenia is the first officially Christian country on earth. And they adopted the Christian faith as their state religion even before Rome. Now, one would have thought that Christian evangelicals would therefore embrace the Armenian cause because of that. But when did logic and consistency ever get in the way of Christians seeking cheap oil? Anyway, so Armenia is landlocked, and at its zenith it stretched from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, so that like every country, its borders have waxed and waned. These days, it's a landlocked country, largely poverty-stricken, has got no precious resources. Now, let's not overdo it. Everybody can read. Most people have got electricity and running water. Most people, all right? So deep in the countryside, they don't. But it's still one of the poorest countries in Europe. I mean, if you count it as Europe at all. So because of its unfavorable geographical situation, the Armenians had to become exceptionally enterprising business people, so they're known to be a canny nation, and it's produced many an affluent merchant. But business acumen does not endear you to those who are less industrious or quick-minded. So this mercantile people, as is often the case, they suffer some racial prejudice, and some people in the region say they're sharpsters, shysters, spivs, and all the rest of it. So the Armenian diaspora has fanned out, and the diasporans can be found in Turkey, not very many these days, Syria, Lebanon, Russia, Iran, the USA, France, India, Argentina, Cyprus, Australia. I've even seen an Armenian church in Singapore. It's about 9 million people of Armenian stock scattered outside their ancestral home. But in some cases, we might be counting someone who's like a quarter Armenian. So of all the former Soviet republics, Armenia is the most canine in its fidelity to Moscow. And the Russians try and insist on absolute fealty to their liege lord. But why? Why is it like this? Because Armenia is the only, has got no other allies. For centuries, the only Christian country in the Caucasus. It was independent. Obviously, Georgia is part of the Iranian Empire, then the Russian Empire. So Armenia is not wealthy. It can't afford modern armaments. Armenia's got only 4 neighbors: Azerbaijan, Turkey, Georgia, and Iran. So it's been in a frozen conflict with Azerbaijan for decades. Azerbaijan is Turkey's hideous sister. Armenia therefore has an adversarial relationship with the Turks. So Armenia's got very little to offer Iran, so the Iranians shan't risk irking Azerbaijan and Turkey by treating the Armenians too cordially. So Armenia has a decent relationship with Georgia, but there can be no real chaleur there, because the Georgians can't afford to annoy Russia too much. Russia's already got Georgia on the back foot because obviously Russia's occupying South Ossetia and Abkhazia. These are legally Georgian regions. So some Armenians did well out of the Soviet Union. Anastas Mikoyan was briefly the Soviet head of state in the late 60s. So the Armenians moved to Russia. They often intermarried and integrated, and there wasn't that much prejudice against them. So Sergei Lavrov is the Russian foreign minister, though he's born in Moscow. He's half Armenian. So therefore he's extra prudent about not being partial towards his mother's birthplace. So there are 1.5 million people of Armenian extraction in Russia. Some are Russian citizens, others are not. Remittances from Armenia from Russia is vital for the Armenian economy. And so Yerevan cannot afford to irritate Moscow, otherwise the Gastarbeiterin might be expelled. Now, Armenia is a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CTSO, which is Russia and a few others. And Russia has a military base in Armenia and patrols Armenia's border with Turkey and Iran. So they want that leverage. And so Armenia buys almost all its arms from Russia, partly the cheaper end of the price range, and Russia's helped them build a nuclear power station. Anyway, in the current round of fighting, Russia's called for restraint on both sides. Now, this has rancorously disillusioned many Armenians. They perceive Russia as being a faithless ally. What's the point in having an alliance with Moscow if they're going to be these weasel words? An ally does not vacillate. And the Armenians want no equivocation. You've got to come down on our side. If you're not going to fight for us, you've got to support us at least morally. But Russia is not fighting their corner, even vocally. So Armenia is in a bind. What are they going to do? Without Russia, they're done for. Okay, they need the economic benefit of Russian amity, and they need arms shipments, otherwise they'll be dead meat. So many Turks will never forgive the Armenians for being victims of genocide over a century ago. Now, there are some very brave and intelligent Turks who recognize what the Ottoman government did over a century ago. That takes real guts to recognize that. Doesn't mean that Turkey is all bad, or that all Turks committed this in 1915, or that all Armenians are good, or that no Turks were murdered either. But to still recognize it is true, that's what happened. Not wanting to be rude to any Turkish person, but that's the plain truth. So Armenia's population is 2.9 million and falling due to low fertility and immigration. And at this rate, there'll be nobody left in Armenia in 2 centuries' time. By contrast, Azerbaijan's population is growing. So Azerbaijan could just sit it out, but things could happen. So Azerbaijan practically floats on oil, and for 36 out of the last 50 years, it's been ruled by the Aliyev dynasty. Anyway, Haydar Aliyev was the founder of the dynasty. He was a KGB man. He was General Secretary of the Communist Party in Azerbaijan in the Soviet 70s. And after some time, they went to the Politburo in Moscow, and then he returned in 1994 to launch a coup d'etat, and he led his country to fight the Armenians to a standstill. So Haydar Aliyev had spent the earlier part of his life arresting and torturing Azerbaijanis who advocated even for real autonomy. Then when independence came, no thanks to him, he reinvented himself as an ardent separatist. So back in the 70s, Haydar Aliyev, he delivered this paean to Stepan Champanian. Champanian was a Bolshevik revolutionary there in 1918. Haydar even went out of his way to point out that Champanian had been an Armenian and said that he belongs to us Azerbaijanis too. But once Haydar Aliyev was president, that was stricken from the record. That was deeply shameful, his fulsome praise for Champanian. So he was an absolute time server and scumbag, Haydar Aliyev, and yet so many things are named in his honor these days. So Haydar died in 2003, and 2 months before he croaked, he shoehorned his son, Ilham Aliyev, into the presidency. So the urbane Ilham Aliyev, he grew up in Moscow. He attended MGIMO, as in Moscow State University of International Relations, top university in the USSR. You could get in there because you're bright or because you had, friends in high places. It was a very nepotistic and inegalitarian place of the Soviet Union. So Ilham speaks fluent English. Russian's his mother tongue. He wasn't even fluent in Azerbaijani till his 40s. So the Aliyev dynasty runs a kleptocracy. They're happy to divert public attention by banging on about the conflict against Armenia. And the Azerbaijani government, they falsify the chronicles, and they pretend that the Armenians were only ever guests in the region. So Baku even claims most of Armenian and Georgia. So Baku is correct in stating that legally Nagorno-Karabakh is their loam, but the Azerbaijani regime is no respecter even of its own laws. So the Aliyev crime family, they run these flagrantly fraudulent elections. They have a preposterous cult of the personality, censorious media policies. They indulge in anti-Armenian bile, and they have an ubiquitous network of secret police to maintain control. The regime allows just enough wealth to percolate down to the masses to forestall massive discontent. So one of the few good things you can say about the Aliyev regime is that it is secular. You can eat what you want, drink what you want, wear what you want. So in the personal sphere, you have liberty, but you have no political freedom. It is a multi-party state, but it's a sham. So this is the curse of the resource-rich country. Almost all the wealth comes from oil and gas, and most of the lucre goes to the president and his camarilla. So the country is run by nepotism. His cronies have got fiefdoms in different sectors of the economy, and the rest of the economy just doesn't develop. So that 1991 to 94 war brought others into the fray. Greek intelligence was helping the Armenians. The Greeks saw Armenia as a way to open a front on Turkey. Some Afghan Islamists came to Azerbaijan to fight the infidel, and this is just a few years after they've been fighting some Azerbaijanis in the Soviet sort of internationalist war, as they said, the 1980s Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. So the Azerbaijan is about 80% Shia, and one of the Mujahideen warlords, Hekmatyar, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who came to the help, was an ultra-Sunni and viciously anti-Shia, but is willing to put that aside for the sake of killing Christians. So the Armenian army deliberately killed hundreds of Azerbaijani civilians in this war. Now, the Azerbaijani government inflates figures and exploits this to try to maintain odium against its neighbor. Did the Azerbaijani army kill Armenian civilians deliberately? Not that I know of. I'd be astonished if there were none, but I'm actually just not aware of any massacres. So if the Aliyev dynasty really cared about Karabakh, they would help the refugees. In fact, they don't. These refugees who fled Nagorno-Karabakh, these Azerbaijanis who fled from the Armenian army, they mostly live in shacks, and the regime doesn't give a damn about them. So the Aliyev family is liberal only in its level of embezzlement. It has an extensive foreign property portfolio. Haydar Aliyev Jr., the president's son, is tipped to succeed his father. He's about 25 now. So the fighting has flared up now. Why now? Well, it's always about economics, usually is. So Turkey gets most of its oil and gas from Russia. Ankara is going to reduce its energy dependence on Russia. The pipeline from Azerbaijan, being there for about 15 years, has helped this a lot. Turks are less susceptible to energy pressure from Russia than ever. On the other hand, that more of them have cars, more of them got AC and stuff. But I'll explain later why they're less susceptible to Russian pressure. The Azerbaijanis, if they went too far against the Armenians, then Russia would cut off the oil and gas to Turkey. That would force the Turks to lean on the Azerbaijanis to go easy on the Armenians. But at the moment, energy is very cheap, and people aren't flying or driving so much or buying things so much, so there's less need for it. So the Turks at the moment can happily afford to buy all their gas from Azerbaijan if Russia cuts them off. And the Russian economy is screaming, so the Russians are less inclined than ever to miss out on hydrocarbon sales. Anyway, the Azerbaijanis spent a few years upgrading their military. They've got a new generation of weapons. They are all tooled up. They're all dressed up. They want somewhere to go. The regime also senses that this is a good thing to do to distract attention from the government's cat-handed handling of the coronavirus and the woeful economic situation, hardship, inequality. So Turkey gets a lot of Russian tourists, but because of coronavirus, there'll be basically no tourists this year. So you're not going to miss out the tourist season because of annoying Russia. You're going to miss out on the season anyway because of coronavirus. Therefore, annoying Russia has no economic downside for once. So Turkey and Russia got an immensely complicated history. I won't go into all the fights and all the agreements. But at the moment, they agree on Syria, even got joint patrols there, but they sharply disagree on Libya. Now, coming to Armenia, it is a fairly free country. It's got more media freedom and more of an independent judiciary than anywhere else in the region except Georgia. And Armenian elections are now genuine. So the current Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, is a Western-minded man. He speaks perfect English. He's less pro-Russian than his predecessors, so Moscow's lukewarm about him. The Azerbaijanis have figured that the Russian response to attacks in Armenia will be feeble because of their lack of enthusiasm for Pashinyan. Now, Russia's never going to let Armenia be totally overrun unless the Turks offer Russia a dream deal, everything the Russians could ever want, several Russian naval bases on the Mediterranean and NATO, and Turkey withdraws from NATO. Well, that's not on the cards. So the moment Armenia is useful for Russia, it shan't be abandoned because Armenia is strategically important in terms of its location. So Armenia would like to join the EU, but that can't happen unless you've got access to the EU. And you can't trade via Turkey. Georgia, well, that's difficult because some of the land is occupied by Russia. Russia could easily cut off land, air, and sea routes there. So the Armenians can't ever join NATO. The Turks wouldn't stand that. The Turks say if you let them in, we're leaving, and Turkey is too big and too important. Anyway, the Turks are occupying North Cyprus, so some Armenians say, well, then we're going to liberate Nagorno-Karabakh. So in 1915 to 1920, a third of all the Armenians in the world were wiped out. A bit like the Jewish experience in the Holocaust, Hitler even said, who now remembers the Armenians? So the Armenians believe they can never run that risk again, which is why they got a very proactive attitude of their own preservation, forward defense. We need more territory. We need a buffer because our country is so small. Otherwise, there's no room for retreat. There's no margin for error. We can only advance or we'll be wiped out. And that's why they've got a very offensive-minded military policy. So, the US criticizes Armenia over occupying Nagorno-Karabakh, but people say, the United States, you're hypocritical. You support Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine, or the Syrian Golan Heights, of some of Lebanon. The United States occupies Guantanamo Bay, despite Cuba not agreeing to that, not accepting rent on it. Anyway, and the United States is still an ally of Turkey, despite the North Cyprus situation. So there is a noisy Armenian lobby in the United States, and it's quite impressive considering they're 0.5% of the American population. But Cher is an American who's an Armenian, Andre Agassi. But that doesn't mean the US government takes action to help Armenia. The United States now recognize the Armenian genocide for what it was, but Washington, D.C. is not going to do anything to help the Armenians. The other regional players are richer and mightier, and that means they merit consideration. So this stalemate between Armenia and Azerbaijan is likely to continue for decades. There's growing strength of Turkey and Azerbaijan. That means that Armenia is living on borrowed time, and Russia's not going to do much to help them. Russia just respects might and wealth. 'Twas ever thus. Most countries are like that. So I'm afraid to say it's a pretty bleak situation for Armenia. Best they could do is to kind of completely settle and then they could be left in peace. Would they be left in peace? Maybe not. There might be so much odium, they might be completely conquered, and they fear there will be defences that will be wiped out. So no wonder a lot of Armenians say, let's just get out whilst we can. That is the grim reality. So make sure you subscribe. Check me out on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And I help you with theses, essays, dissertations, elocution, interview preparation. I translate from French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Russian, German. I'm a tour guide in London. Book online lessons with me in English, English foreign language, English literature, history, politics, religious studies, French, law, geography, things like that. Toodaloo!